Welcome to the Lowdown Podcast, the show where we dive deep into the topics that directly impact the evolving originator. I'm your host, Connor Bartley, bam! And joining me today is a true success story. Just over 6 years originating, 800 families helped, top 1% originator in the nation, top 250 Latino loan officer, President's Club, Scotsman Guide, CrossFit enthusiast, and host of over 100 podcast episodes, William Gomez. Welcome to the Lowdown.
Connor, I'm honored to be here, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Man, I am excited to have you here today, William. It's an honor to visit with you. I know you're going to share so much value for the Lowdown listeners, and I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and recently saw a Facebook post of yours celebrating your 100th episode of your podcast, Willpower, which, awesome name, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk with you about this journey because so many originators that I talk with say that they have thought about doing a podcast, are thinking about it. People tell them they should. They're looking into it, and they never get started. They never do it, and so I really wanted to dive into your journey on that and kind of unpack how you arrived at starting one, what these last couple of years have been like, how you come up with your guest list, all that. But before we begin, some context for our listeners. You've got a great story. Like, I didn't know this about you until you sent me some information before we started recording this, that you moved to the United States when you were 8.5 years old, didn't speak the language, and here you are today, wildly successful and just doing, top of the industry kind of stuff. So, tell us a little bit about you, the man behind the success, and what makes William Gomez William Gomez.
Yeah, man. Again, thanks so much for having me. I am truly excited about this conversation because one of the things that drives me, that gets me out of bed every single morning, is adding value to people. Whether that's my wife, whether that's my son, whether that's my employees, whether that's my realtor partners, whoever that is. And I know that however many people listen to this, whether it's a couple of people, a couple hundred people, a couple thousand people, whatever the number is, if I can add value to one person, and that might even just be you, Connor. Like, I hope that you get off this call and I've added some value to you. That is what I'm truly passionate about, right? And I was born in Mexico, as you said. My mom had me when she was 17 years old. And then 2 years after that, she had my little sister. And then 2 years after that, she had my little brother. Never met my dad. I grew up in Mexico, very, very poor. Whenever I say that, though, a lot of people can only put that to what they know. And so many people just know of poverty here in the United States. Poverty here in the United States looks a lot different than in any other country, especially even just as close as our neighbors down south, which is Mexico. I remember my mom having to work 3 different jobs just to put food on the table. And when I say food on the table, I'm talking about, I remember eating tortilla and lime and salt, and we would have like 2 or 3 of those at night as our dinner. And but as a little kid, you don't really know what's going on, and you don't know. Right now, I have a 17-month-old, and he has no idea whether he lives in a shack or a mansion. Like you're just a kid, right? You don't know anything. But I do remember when that time that truly made me realize like what our situation was, and I was about 5.5 years old, and we were walking through this plaza that had a bunch of vendors, and vendors that were selling food. Some were selling, product, different things. All I remember is that there was this cart that had it was a pizza cart. Like, they probably were selling other food, but I just remember seeing like they were selling pizza by the slice. And I remember asking my mom, "Hey, Mom, do you think that we can get a piece of pizza?" And she said, "Son, we can't afford that." And I said, what if we get one piece and we share it between the four of us? Me, my brother, my sister, and her. And she looks at me and she has tears come down her eye and she said, son, we really can't afford that. And it was at
Mm.
that moment that I realized what her situation was.
Yeah.
Because if a family of four can't afford one piece of pizza, like something's not right.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I truly believe everything happens for a reason. And it wasn't shortly after, it wasn't long after that. It was about 6 months after that. My mom comes up to me and she says, hey, I think I found a way for us to be able to, you know, better our situation. And at that point, I knew what her situation was. So I was like, great, like, what is it? And she says, well, I found a job, but it's not here. It's in the United States. And I said, great, like, when are we leaving, right? At this point, I don't even understand that the United States is a different country.
Sure.
I'm about like six years old at the time. And she goes, well, the thing is that I only have enough money to go by myself. I need you to stay back with your aunt and uncle and take care of your brother and sister.
Wow.
And everything in me wanted to just bawl like a little kid because I didn't
Yeah.
want my mom to leave me. But I knew that something had to be done in order to be able to change our situation. This story, sharing the story now that I have a 17-month-old, that I've only been away from him like a couple nights in his entire life. We were talking about going to GrowthCon. I was there, and my wife and my son were upstairs. They came with me, and just because like I know the time is fleeing, and I
Yeah.
don't want to be away from him, right? So I can't even imagine me telling this story. I can't imagine how hard it was for my mom to have to make that sacrifice, right? But she said it was only going to be 6 months. So I was like, I can make this work. You know, our life changed. It's not like we became rich overnight, but I mean, we had better food to eat now, and we were going to a better school, all that stuff. I didn't care about that. All I cared about that is that um, I didn't have my mom,
Right.
and then 6 months go by, and I'm excited for my mom to come back, and I said, hey, mom, like it's been 6 months. Like, when are you coming back? And she said, well, hey, I think I found a way to get you guys here. And I said, great. Like, when do we pack our bags?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I need a little bit more time to save a little bit more money. And I said, how long? Like, how much time? This time she didn't give me a time frame. And it wasn't until 2.5 years later I got to see my
Oh,
mom for the first time. And it was one of the best days and one of the worst days of my life because I got to see my mom for the first time. Um, and I was so happy about that. But it was one of the worst days because I got to come to a new country, didn't speak the language, like a
yeah.
lick of English. The food tasted different. My mom, my little brother didn't recognize his mom because
Yeah.
he was too young
Sure.
whenever she left, and this is before FaceTime and everything. But man, I knew that my mom made a sacrifice that I couldn't take for granted. So growing up, everything I did, I just knew that I had no option but to succeed in everything that I did. Even in school, I hated school. I didn't like school, but I knew that I had to give my all to try to get the best grades that I could in order to not let my mom down and not let that time that we were apart um,
Yeah.
go to waste, right? And then I go, to playing sports in high school, and after school, having, being a waiter, working at GNC, being a personal trainer. I've had, I've had that in me the entire way of like, I
Yeah.
have to make my mom proud, right? And people always ask me how I got into this business, and I said I actually kind of got into by accident, which, as you know, most people in the mortgage business
Yeah.
get into it by
Join the
accident.
club, right?
Yeah. And so for me, how it started is I was actually finishing school, and I knew that I needed to uh, let go of the job that I was at because I was working until I was pretty much burning the candle at both ends, as they say.
Sure.
And then so I got an opportunity to become a part-time teller at a bank. And to me, in my head, was a demotion, being a manager at a GNC and going to a part-time teller. But I was like, it's only seasonal. I go into it, and then I love being in front of people and everything. And then I remember my manager telling me that he was also a part-time teller at one point, and he was like the senior vice president, branch manager. You know how banks love their long names. And I go, how did you get there? And he said, you just got to learn how to sell. And I said, what do you sell at a bank? And um, he said, start with savings accounts. Anybody that doesn't have a savings account, sell them a savings account. And so the first day he told me that, I sold 78, 75 savings accounts.
Golly.
And I just felt like, I was just like, I just had so much energy. Like my adrenaline was like, and I was like, okay, what's next? What's next? And he would be
Yeah.
like, no, keep with savings accounts until you perfect it, and we go to the next thing. And then after a while, we got to the point where he was like, do you know what a credit card is? And I was like, yeah, like, like what you used to get money out of your bank account. He goes, no, that's a debit card. I said, what's the difference? And then he teaches me about credit cards, teaches me how to sell them. There's this lady coming up, and she's withdrawing money, and I'm just itching to just picture this credit card as soon as everything is done.
Yeah.
And she's done with everything, and I pitch her. I'm like, 0% interest for 12 months or 18 months. I can't remember by this point. And I go, even if you don't need it, like, it's great to have it, blah, blah, blah. She, like, thoughts me. He goes, that actually would really help me. And I said, great. So at that point, I knew that I've made the sell. So I'm, like, talking to her, actually trying to get to know her. And then she is she's telling me her story. She's a single mom of 3 kids.
Wow.
And I start seeing my mom, like, right in front of me.
Sure.
And then as soon as I'm done, I click submit, gets declined.
Oh,
And I'm just like, I don't have the guts to tell her. Imagine you, Connor, like, you've been working on this, like, LO to come over to your company, blah, blah, blah. And then you finally make it, right? And then they're like, he doesn't pass the background check or something, right?
Right.
And you're like, what? So now you've promised this guy everything, and you have to come back and be like, hey, actually, your place that you're at right now actually sounds
sounds pretty good. Yeah.
So anyways, I didn't have the guts to tell her. I said, hey, can you give me 1 second? I actually acted like my computer was frozen up.
Yeah.
And then I go back, talk to my manager, and I explain the whole situation. First question, he says, does she own or rent? And I say she owns, because that was the first question. And then he goes, does she have any equity? And I said, what is that? And he said, he just comes over, talks to her. 3 weeks later, we're able to close on a home equity loan, pay off all her debt, and then give her enough money to have for the next 6, 8, 10 months. I don't remember what it was. But she looked at me, and she was like, thank you so much. Even though I didn't do the deal, like, I was just on the sideline watching. At this point, I still probably didn't even know what equity was. I was confused about the whole thing. All I knew is that we made a difference, and the big difference on that was because she owned a home. If I would have said no, she rents, we wouldn't have been able to help her. So after that, every person that I talked to, whether I was selling them a savings account, a checking account, a car loan, a credit card, I would always ask, do you own or do you rent? And then I started, sending so many people to the loan officer that worked in our office. And I know it's a long story, but I shared that with you to tell you who I am and why I am where I'm at today. And it's because I know why I'm doing it. And I've known it from the day one that I started this job. And if you're trying to do a podcast, you're trying to do more loans, whatever you're trying to do, if you don't know why you're doing it, you're never going to get to the level that you want to get to. So, man, again, I'm excited to be here and try to share anything that I can to try to help even that one person, get ahead to where they want to go on their goals. So
That's a phenomenal story. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important for a lot of people to hear that, because it was heartfelt, it was raw, it was vulnerable, and it's so important to know what fuels you to keep you, alive in there. I mean, we've been in some of the hardest times in this industry has ever seen these last couple of years, and I mean, people are dropping like flies out of the industry, and having that at the core, I think, would fuel anybody to, perform and survive this time and get to the other side of it. So thank you for sharing that. We talked a little bit before we started recording about this topic of podcasting. And I mentioned to you that now after we're done recording today, I'll be top 1% podcaster, because 99% quit after episode 1. And this is episode 2 officially of the Lowdown Podcast, but you've got 101 other episodes on me. So So I'd love to learn more about that journey and how you got started. Because, like I said in the intro, so many loan officers I talked to today in this era of personal branding and social media and the different ways to market, they tell me they have been told they should do a podcast, that they want to do one, but they just never start. So how could someone get started? How did you get started? I'd love for you to share that story that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I think a thing that helps me out a lot is that I've always told myself, I couldn't tell you how long it's been now, but I never want to be an I wish man. What that means is, I'm sure you've experienced it maybe yourself, or you've heard of people say, there's always that one person, no matter what the environment is, that, oh man, I wish I was doing that. Like, hey, me and my family are going to Disney World next month. Man, I wish I was doing that. Hey,
Sure.
I have a CrossFit competition next week. Man, I wish I was. And it's like, to me, that sounds just like defeating. It's like, no, and it sounds like a lie, to be honest with you. It's like, no, you don't wish that, because if you did wish that, you would just do it,
Do it.
right? And
Hmm.
then, so to give you like an example, 2021, somebody invited me to this bike race to check it out. I'd never been it, and I went in there. I fell in love with it, and I was like, man, are all these pros? And they're like, no, there's people that just ride, and there's longer rides out there too. And I said, and I was about to, anytime that I was about to say that, and podcasting is the same thing. I wish I had a podcast. I wish I had 100 episodes. I wish whatever, right? Anytime I'm about to say it, because still I know that it's in my brain that I'm like, I was like, I'm gonna do this next year. And then they're like, what? They're like, do you have a bike? And I was like, no, but I'm gonna do it. And then they're
Yeah.
like, okay, like you're crazy, but okay. And then so a year goes by. It was actually the day after I came back from the mastermind where I started my personal branding, and I'm
Yeah.
having brunch at this place here in Tulsa, and somebody mentioned that race, and the race is in June, and then I said, I'm supposed to do that, and then they're like, what? They're like, do you have a bike? And I'm like, no, but I signed up. I just signed up for it. 103-mile bike race. Didn't even have a bike. Signed up for it. And then I was like, okay, now I got to look for a bike shop. And I'm glad I signed up for it before, because I thought that a regular bike was going to be like $300. I go into the bike shop, it was $1,500 for a basic bike.
Yeah.
And then, long story short, I go on 20 miles without cycling shoes, without a butt pad. If anybody's ever ridden a bike, you know what I'm talking about. It's the worst idea ever.
Yeah.
I hated it. I was like, what did I just do? But I was like, I got to do this, right? Time comes, I actually go and trade in that bike, get another bike, and then that was now like $2,800. And then I ride this 103-mile bike race, and after I'm done, I'm like, I never want to do this again. And but of course, at this point, I'm already so invested so much
Oh yeah.
money in that I'm like, no, I have to keep riding it, right? And I shared that with you because there's so many people that are very like, I wish I had a podcast, or they even say like, I'm gonna do a podcast, but they just never do it, right? And
Right.
I personally, there's accountability with me if I say I'm just gonna do it, and then you know loan officers more than anybody, especially the successful ones. They're very ADD, so it's not like, hey, unless their assistant's putting them on the calendar or whatever, they're not. Most of them don't take the time to actually make it happen. So for me, I'm like that. So I'm like that to where like I don't want to plan it out. Like I just want to do it now, right?
Yeah.
So as I was sharing with you, people always ask me like, how long did you want to have a podcast before you actually had it? And I'm like, I actually never wanted to have a podcast. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, this whole thing happened by accident. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? Because it seems like every other person and their mom wants to have a podcast, right? I think there's over now, actually, I was pulling that up earlier. Yeah. Did you know that there are currently over 6 million podcasts in the world?
Wow.
Over 6
No.
million.
That's
6 million.
crazy. Yeah.
Before COVID, Connor, we had under 2 million. I think it was like a little bit over a million
No
before COVID.
kidding.
So,
Wow.
anyways, do person, you know that I do a lot of social media content. I'm big on my personal brand. That has
Yeah.
helped my brand or my business tremendously. As you said, um, our business has experienced like some of the lowest times. I mean, some of the guys that I work with have been doing this for 20 years plus,
Right.
and they say this is the toughest time they've ever seen.
Yeah.
And man, if I wouldn't have invested what I did and worked on my personal brand, I don't know where my business would be at. Right now, we're about 26% up from what we were at last year.
Wow.
And this month alone, I have in the pipe to close this month two deals over $1 million that came directly from social media, TikTok and Instagram.
Wow.
And so I was doing short form content just to have be top of mind, right? What I love about personal branding, and that includes TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, podcasting, everything, is that it will get you in rooms that you'll never be able to step in, right? It will
Sure.
get
Yeah.
people. You got to remember that you're not really selling a company to come work for you, Connor. I'm not selling loans. Our job is to create relationships, right? And in
Yep.
order to create good relationships, you have to get people to know you. First of all, to know you, to like you, and to trust you.
Hmm.
Personal brand, social media, that's what it does. Man,
Right.
we went to GrowthCon. Dude, the amount of people that I saw down there that I met for the first time that felt like they knew me. They're like, Will, like, I'm like, and I felt bad because I'm like, have I met you before? And it's like, they're like, I've been following you for blah, 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 like all this stuff. And just imagine if you're a lender listening to this right now, if you walked into a GTAR thing of your local state, city, wherever you're at, and that's how realtors work. I just had a realtor meeting, and she's top producing agent. She's just looking at me. This first time I ever met her, and she's like, you're just like you are in your videos, and I'm like, thank you. Like, I hope that that's the case. Like, and so I was just doing that just to be able to get my name out there even more. And then, but what I noticed is that everybody out there wants to do that, not just lenders, but realtors too.
Right.
And then so what I noticed is that my conversion started going up and on getting appointments. And not only did it start going up, but people started reaching out to me like, hey, would love to take you out to coffee, realtors, to see how you're doing what you're doing.
Sure.
One specific guy that I had reached out to 3 different times and, denied me 3 different times, he reaches out to me and says, dude, I love what you're doing on social media. Would love to take you out to coffee. And I go, hey, thanks so much. I go, let me check my schedule. And I was like, I think I have sometime next month. Like, I made
Yeah.
him wait just because I was just like, kind of like annoyed. I'm like, sure, dude, you like me now, right? It's like that person that like in high school that you never talk to, and then they go
Yeah.
on The Voice or something, or they're a professional athlete, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's Connor, my buddy from
Yeah.
high school, and it's like,
Hey, that's a good
oh
move.
yeah. And then but anyway, so I go meet with him, and dude, it was one of the best coffee dates I've ever had, and we actually not only started doing business together, but we became really good friends with him and his wife. Me and my wife did, and his wife actually took pictures at our when our son was born, and so we became pretty close. And then and after the meeting, he goes, man, he's like, I really love what you're doing. He goes, I'd love to work with you. He goes, once we start doing some deals together, can I come be on I would love to come on your podcast. At the time I didn't have a podcast, but since I
Oh.
was doing so many like talking head videos, I was like, I got to change it up. So we had a studio that looks nothing like it does today. And I was like, hey, I would invite people to come in and say, hey, can you have a 5-minute conversation with me so I can
Sure.
get like a 30-second reel for it? And then people thought it was a podcast, and they would say, hey, where do I listen to the rest of it? And I would be like, there's no rest of it. But with him, I do, best under pressure. So I go, why don't you come on next week? And he goes, really? And I was like, yeah, dude, come on. I said, you're going to send me business regardless, so come on. And then so I come back to the office. At the time, there's this girl that was helping us, this college girl, and I go, hey, Sam, we need to start a podcast. And she goes, how do I do that? And I go, YouTube it. And she was
Yeah.
just like, okay. But then I was like, man, he can't be my first guest because he thinks I already have this podcast. And then so I have another guy from my office. I'm like, hey, can you come in and just do like a 40-minute conversation with me just on camera? I honestly felt weird calling it a podcast.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
I would be like, hey, can you come in, just sit down, and there'll be cameras on, blah, blah, blah. And we sit down. We have one of the best conversations we've ever had, because that's what I love about podcasting now. The reason I do it is this is the only genuine conversation you get to have with somebody, because they are like, this is probably the only time that I've ever pulled my phone out in a podcast just to look at something.
Sure.
Because like, if you want to give it your all, you can't be distracted. And then
Right.
we live in a world with so many distractions that it's hard to have a genuine conversation. It's sad to say, but it's true. Have the best conversation. We get done, and only 10 minutes of that got recorded. And he was
Yeah.
like, oh, shoot. He's like, do you want to do it again? And I was like, you can't replicate that. And then so I go, forget it. I said, I'll post it up. So if you go to the very, very bottom of the very first episode, the first episode is actually number 2, and it's Kevin's. And actually that day, Connor, I didn't tell you this earlier, I wear contacts. I ended up getting like pink eye or something.
Oh
So
no.
my eyes are super red, and then I had to wear my glasses, which I hate. Everything was telling me, don't do this. Don't
Right.
do this. But I was just like, no, I have to do this. I have to do this. I'm not going to be the people that say, I wish
Yeah.
I was doing that. Just get out there and do it. If you truly want to do it, you'll find a way.
Yeah. So, a couple of things. What I have found about personal branding that has been valuable just personally for me is the forced accountability that it can create. So, I know that if I get out on social and say I'm going to do something, that I now have to do it. So, I feel like that's a hidden, I don't know, secret weapon of personal branding too, is that it forces you to follow through, because if you've got followers and people have that expectation now that you're going to deliver on that promise, you almost have to. And I use that as just a way to keep myself accountable. So when you started or had Sam start researching the podcast, and for the listeners, like, what platforms did you look at? How did you know, to go and post everything? Did you start with, because, I'm on Riverside, and Riverside's great. It gives you, after post-production, it will create these short clips. If I tell it under 30 seconds or 60, 30 to 60 seconds with these keywords, I mean, it'll automatically go use AI and find it. So how did you go about that process?
So there wasn't as much AI as there is now when I started. And crazy to say that because it was only like 2 years ago.
Right.
But so pretty much, and I kind of started doing it with her. But that's one of the biggest blessings that I've had, is that I've been able to kind of outsource a lot of this stuff. So that way it saves me a lot of time. And the way that I explain it to people is that, because there's a lot of people that say, well, I don't have the money for that. And I'd say, okay, that's fine. But let me ask you this. Do you mow your own lawn? And then whether you say yes or no, right? Somebody says yes. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, if you had enough money, would you pay somebody to do that so it could save you the hour or 2 hours that it takes you to do that? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. But why are you doing it now? Because I don't have enough money to pay somebody. And if I don't mow it, then my lawn is going to look horrible.
Right.
My neighbor's going to judge me, all this stuff. Exactly. You're having to do it because you can't pay somebody else to do it. So it still has to be done, right? So I think that personal branding, social media, it's getting to the point where you can't just say like, oh, well, good for you because you have enough money to outsource it. And I can't do it. Poor me. No, it's like making the calls. It's like doing the break breads, all these different things that has to be done, right? But if you're able to pay somebody to do it, at that point, it gives you time back. So like for me, I'm able to dive in enough for me to know what's going on. But I do kind of like now, every time I do a podcast, it's literally like what we're doing now. Like I just go in, sit down, have a conversation, leave, and then everything else gets done. But when we we literally went to YouTube, like how to start a podcast. And then it's like, well, you need whatever it's called, like a hub or whatever, like Buzzsprout or
Podbean,
Anchor or like
something like that.
whatever.
Yeah.
At the time, we chose Anchor, which is not even a thing anymore. It's now
Okay.
Spotify for podcasters. And if I had to go back, we have a different podcast. I would go with Buzzsprout based on the experience that I've had with that. But
Okay.
it's hard to get your stuff to transfer. So like if you already have like, if I was to transfer now, like it's pretty much like restarting all over with like your downloads and all that stuff.
Sure.
So, but we just picked one. Like, don't overthink it. So
Yeah,
many
just do
people
it.
are like, well, let me do research and see which one is, because I heard Will said that you can't transfer after you hit, 10 episodes, 100 episodes. If you're thinking like that, you're probably never going to get to even 10 episodes. Like, just pick
Right.
one. Who cares, right? And then after that, just kind of like realized how easy it was to be able to upload it and then put a description, connect all your accounts, and then it distributes everywhere else, right? And the thing is, if you go all the way back to our very first episode, like I said, episode number 1, it was technically number 2. Episode number 2 is number 1, and if you listen to it, 10 minutes, it'll cut off. There's no intro, there's no outro. You just uploaded it, right?
Right.
And if you kind of keep going, you'll see kind of like, oh wait, it was the same cover, and it was like, oh, then he's changing the cover. Like, it's like as we kept doing it, we kept evolving it, right?
Sure, yeah.
Most people look at my 100th whatever episode and then say, I want it to be like this.
Yeah.
And if you wait for it to be like that, or whatever episode that you're listening to, right, you're never going to do it. Because
Oh yeah.
it's
Well,
going to be a progress.
Dustin Owen from T-Lop, he'll tell you that they didn't know what they were doing until episode 41, I think.
Yeah,
So,
he's been on. Yeah,
yeah, I saw that.
He's been on, yeah.
Yeah. So on the subject of guests, a lot of people, especially loan officers that we're talking about today, if they were to do a podcast, I think most would say it's a great platform to bring my referral partners on, to highlight them, to give them a stage to tell their story, and to get my title partners or a CPA, financial advisor. But your guest list is really unique. I mean, you've got people from NASA, MMA. I've seen a couple loan officers, some other folks that are local to the Tulsa area. Dustin Owen. So I mean, it's a very eclectic group of folks. How do you go about cultivating your guest list, and what's the thought process behind that?
So I will say that part, I wouldn't want people to take that from me. And this is what I mean by that. Told you, the whole podcast happened by accident.
Yeah.
You mentioned the name Willpower. My name is William. That came up because I was laying in bed with my wife, and I told her the story, and I was like, oh shoot, I need to come up with a name. And she goes, Willpower, haha. And I go, okay. And then I just didn't think about it. And then Sam's like, we need a name if we're gonna post it out there. And I just go, Willpower. She goes, I like that. And I was like, really? My wife said that, trying to be funny or whatever.
Oh, that's great.
And then, so cool, Willpower, right? And then also, she goes, do you want it to be Willpower Real Estate something or whatever? And I go, you know what? No, because you're going to run out of like real estate people to talk to. And then especially because this is after a while, but I was already kind of thinking at the beginning, I've out of the 100 ones, I've only had less than 5 that's been through Riverside or Zoom or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
I like to do it in person. I mean, I've
Yeah,
been to
sure.
San Diego, I've been to Vegas, I've been to Dallas, I've been to Florida, like all these places, Tennessee to do them in person, because that's like the beauty of it, right? It's like having
that's
like
cool.
a cool conversation. And but I said, I don't want it to be just like to where I can only have real estate people on. And then I've always been a very curious person. So like whether I'm like, I just always want to learn from people. Like I believe that if I'm spending my time with somebody, I can always learn at least one thing. And I'm very curious. I'm always like asking questions. And sometimes I probably ask too many questions or questions that like most people wouldn't ask, but I'm just very curious, right?
Yeah.
And then so I was just like, the first two guys are real estate people, but then after that, I'm like, who are some people that like I would want to just have a conversation with that maybe somebody else can listen to this and they can learn something from it.
Sure.
And then so I did the opposite of what I did on my Instagram, and that is I niche down. Like my Instagram is very niche down. My Instagram, my Facebook, my TikTok, it's like you go there, that I am a finance guy, that I'm a loan officer, blah blah blah. Where you get to know me there of really who I am is in the stories. That's why when I meet people, people are like, did you cold plunge today? Or like, how's Mav doing? Like, it's funny. We went to a local fair and we had 5 people to ask me like, who, like, they're like, this is Mav. Like, you post them on, like, talking about my son.
Yeah.
And then, so like, even though I post like 3% of my day on stories, people feel like they know me, right?
Sure.
But I started in March of 2022, and by May of 2022, I already had over 10,000 followers. When I grew that from like 900 followers to like over 10,000, now we're over almost just like we're like a 56,000 on Facebook. We went over 56, all this stuff. So I already had like the people, the audience there, right? That were like, hey, where do I listen to that, right? If you don't, especially if you don't have that, but if you want to have bigger success in podcasts, you want to do like what you're doing with what you were telling me of like, this is very niche down, because if you cast out a net of like, of people that are like a net of like 1 million people to try to reach so many people, at the end of the day, you're not going to reach many. But if you try to do a smaller net and say this is only for loan officers, then it's like more people are going to come to it, right?
Sure.
So that is one thing that I wouldn't call it a mistake that I made, because I still, I mean, as you saw, like anybody, I just met with a couple guys that were on Shark Tank that they're going to come on in January and they're going to tell me their story. And it's like, I that's what makes me like that. So I'm to the point, and to be honest with you, and I think the reason why I've gotten to over 100 episodes is because I do it because I like it. I could care less about like the analytics as opposed to on my Instagram, I care a lot about the analytics, and because I'm like, how many people are we reaching? Like, I want to make sure that we're reaching as many people there. So to answer your question, that was a very long answer, but it's like, I just want to have people on that I know that I can learn from. And then other people, pretty much like the niche that I have is come join and listen to a conversation of somebody that's successful, because I would say that anybody that's been on has some type of success, but most people think that success came overnight and they forget about, everything else. So tell me your story. How did you get to where you're at? Kind of like you did, but it's across the board, right? So,
No, I love it. I think a takeaway for listeners a few takeaways would be, be authentic about your story. Just get started, right? Don't hesitate. Just get out there, start making the content, start recording the podcast. If you want to do it, do it. Don't be the I wish man, right? and just, I love your comment about that you just enjoy what you're doing and not overthinking the analytics and this and that side of it. I think all too often we do get wrapped up in the likes and the views and the comments, and there's a time and place for that when you're being intentional about how you're reaching an audience, to your point. Like, I think that's wise. You want to see what type of content is really resonating with the audience that you're trying to reach. But if you're having a good time, like, don't kill it by by overthinking is this good enough for everyone else? Like, clearly with the people that you're meeting and the types of conversations that you're having, that's probably feeding something, in you that's really important. And it's important to have fun, I mean, for me, these conversations are really fun. I love talking to loan officers that are at the top of their game, because in my experience recruiting for the last 10 years in this industry, you guys are very interesting people, like resilient people, innovative, trying new things, taking big risks. Like, it's really fun for me to dive into these topics with folks like you, because it's inspiring, right? It gets my fuel, lights my fire a little bit and says, okay, I want to be more like that. And so anyway, those are just some of the takeaways. So I tried to prep you for this. I don't know if you took a look, and if you knew I was ever actually going to ask you these questions, but I like to end these episodes with something a little fun. Okay.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So we got the lightning round. These are the 5 fun questions that I shared. And let's see what you got. These are kind of the let's get to know William Gomez types of questions. So first is, what is a favorite quote of yours from a movie, TV show, or song lyric?
You know what's crazy is I'm a big quote person, but as far as like, man, I'm just gonna give you a quote of, and actually I just saw this on a Mirror story, and I
Okay.
loved it, and it says, "Don't have a to-do list, have a done list." And
Okay.
and I've thought about that, and I've thought about it over and over again, and I'm like, I love that so much. Like, don't have things, because that's most people. They're like, I have to do a podcast, I have to do this. It's like, just do it. Just go out there and do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
I have so many of them that are actually not movie or lyrics, all this stuff. But I love quotes. But that's the first one that comes to mind because it's the most recent one.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Like, don't focus on what you haven't done yet. Focus on the wins you've already accumulated and build on those. That's great. What is a hidden talent that you have?
A hidden talent that I have. I would say that, man, I feel like all my talents, I maybe, put them out there.
Not so hidden.
I was gonna say, running a marathon without training. I mean, that's kind of out there.
Hey, that's huge,
A
man.
lot of people think that I've trained for it. I mean, this is not hidden, but I would say that this is what's gotten me to where I'm at today, and it's just resilience, like you said, like not taking the amount of times that I've been told by so many people, like you are very persistent. It's countless, and I think that that's what's gotten me to where I am today.
That's awesome, man. So if you weren't a loan officer, what other career would you be?
It's a great question. If I was not a loan officer, honestly, right now, like if I wasn't a loan officer after I have already been a loan officer for 5 years, I think I would really love to dive into like being a full-time podcaster, dude. Like, I would
Yeah.
love that. I would
Yeah.
absolutely love that.
I think you're onto something, man. What is something that you've always wanted to learn how to do?
I always wanted to learn how to be a really good swimmer. I can swim, but
Okay.
one of the things, I do bike rides, I do CrossFit, I do runs, and the only thing that I haven't done is like a triathlon or an Ironman.
Yeah.
And actually, Dustin and I talked about this as well too, because
Okay.
he's into Ironman.
He just did one not too long
Yeah.
ago, yeah.
And it's because like I would really have to train for that, and the swimming part would be really, like, it would be pretty challenging for me. So
Yeah.
that's why I've never said I wish I could do it, because I'm like, hey,
You know your
I'm
limit.
not gonna say that. I'm just gonna, So I wish I could be a really good swimmer. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And then last question. What is one thing from your childhood that you wish would make a comeback?
So I was sharing with you, it was my mom had 3 different jobs. One of those jobs was that she cleaned houses, and the reason I remember
Okay.
that is because I used to go with her on the weekends, and we didn't have a TV, so I used to get to watch TV on the weekends and watch.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you what cartoons I watched, but one, and that was Blue's Clues. And I
Okay.
remember I used to ask my mom, like, "Hey, can I have a Blue's Clues toy?" And she's like, "Son, like, we
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
afford that." And then so fast forward to Christmas of 2020. You know, my son was born in 2023, so this is 3 years before he was born. And you know, we had Christmas at my house because we just moved into this new build house that my wife and I moved into, and you know, we gave each other gifts and everything, and everybody had already opened all the gifts. And my mom goes, I have one more gift. She goes out to the car, and we're like, what is she getting? And it's like this, you know, box about this big, and we're like, who's that for? And she's like, I want you to open it, but it's not for you. And I was like, okay. So I open it, and it's a Blue's Clues stuffed animal.
Yeah.
And I go, and her and I looked at each other, and then we were like, had tears in our eyes because it just kind of reminded us of like how far we've come. And then I go, wait, it's not for me. And she goes, it's for my future grandchild. And then you know, we just got more emotional there. And I share that with you because one, my favorite color is blue. That's why I love blue. And then two is because now I got my son to try to love Blue's Clues, and he doesn't care for it, but he likes Bluey, which is kind of like a compromise. But the original Blue's Clues would make a comeback.
Yeah, that would be awesome, man. So are you, because there were two guys, right? Like,
not the one that some people say he looks like me, like the brown guy. I don't know what he is, but no, the original guy, like the
original guy. Okay, yeah, bring it back to old school. Okay, love it, man. You know, I love this era that we're living in now, where these things are starting to pop up. Like, I'm a huge Cobra Kai fan.
Yeah.
Like, because I loved Karate Kid, you know, and then they bring this series back with the different angle, and it's, you know, so good. You know, I can't wait for Friday. It's that's when I guess it'll finally come to the conclusion. So,
man, I can't wait for that either. I didn't know there was a new one coming out.
Oh yeah. Friday's a big day. We got Tyson and Jake Paul. I see your Muhammad Ali back there. I don't know if you're going to watch that fight.
I might. So it's funny. I'm not even like a boxer fan, but I just love like how much of a winner. Dude, I don't know anything about basketball. I don't watch basketball, but look at this.
Yeah. Ah, yes.
I just love winners. I just love winners. That's what I love.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, it's inspirational, right? So you know, surround yourself with that kind of stuff, and you know, it just I don't know, it gets you going. So anyway,
sure. Thanks so much for having me, Connor. Appreciate you, man.
Absolutely, man. It was great talking with you. Thanks for everything you shared, and you know, I look forward to just more interaction in the future. But thanks for dropping by the Lowdown today.
Of course.